Alright guys, so today we're going to be doing kind of a Mediterranean style pizza, which I completely made up. It's totally not legitimate, but we're going to call it something along those lines. So first what I've got is 2.5 teaspoons of active dry yeast, and I've got my water set here to 110, so there's 2.5 teaspoons in there, and my water here is exactly 110, which is what I need. If I go much higher than that, I can actually shock my yeast, and then it won't rise properly. So I'm going to come over here, and it's 1 1/4 cups water here. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to get this yeast to bloom. Again, when I'm measuring this, I'm trying to get to that center of stuff, the center of the water to be at that 1 1/4 mark. So remember that gravity's pushing down onto the water, so it's going to be higher on the sides than it actually is. So you want to make sure that that middle part is what's actually getting up to that 1 1/4 line. I'm a little low, but you'll see that basically what's going to happen while I'm trying to get my other ingredients all set here is that this is going to get all kind of fluffy and bubbly here in a minute. And that's just the blooming of the yeast. Now, I've already measured out my flour in tablespoons of sugar here because I started this, I goofed, and then I basically had to start over. So I'm using whole wheat flour here, and I'm putting in 4 cups into my mixing bowl. I'm using, let's see, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of salt to this mixture. Now, you can't really avoid the sugar in a bread recipe, right? And the reason for that is that the yeast is going to feed off of that that sugar, and it's going to basically fart out carbon dioxide, which is going to cause your bread to rise. So that's why we need to make sure that we're not going too hot with our water here. Again, I measured it out to 110 degrees before I mixed it together, and that's so I don't shock that yeast and I don't kill it before I make the bread. So yes, the sugar is necessary. It's not a lot, but there's still going to be sugar in my whole wheat flour that's going to help with that. And then the salt actually, besides just kind of seasoning the bread, it's also going to be a little bit of a yeast inhibitor. So I'm just going to give this a nice little mix here, so just so that it's pretty well incorporated, so you don't get spots of sugar or salt in your end product. You don't have to use the brown sugar that I use. The recipe actually calls for just sugar, which you can use, whichever works for you. And I'm just going to let that go for a little bit here. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in my oil, which is calling for 1 1/2 tablespoons of oil. This is a good use of my olive oil here. It's going to be a little bit protected by the flour and all that, so I don't have to worry about it, getting too hot and carcinogenic, or it could be full of shit. But I need to use it because it's sitting around and not doing much. So there's 2, and put in a 1/2 tablespoon more. And so when I go to mix this one, I'm going to be using a bread hook. It's really important that you don't use like a paddle or a whisk on this. It's going to destroy the whisk, but the paddle's going to have too much connection. It's going to have too much grip onto the dough, and it's going to burn out your motor. So we don't really want to have that happen. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in my mixer here. You can, if you want to, you can knead this on the counter. I find that I'm personally impatient, okay? And so what's going to happen is that I tend to be like, oh, I want it to be less sticky on my hands. I want it to be done already. And so I'll just keep adding the flour, and then I overwork the gluten, and it's going to become stiff and hard and all that, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to double check to make sure I've let this go ahead and sit long enough. The book I'm going out of, which I highly recommend, is The Baker's Tour by Nick Malarkey. I've totally butchered that name, and so okay, so it's probably sat here long enough for that to bloom. We should see like a little bit of foaminess starting to show up there. I'm going to go ahead and toss that in there. And I'm going to start this off on low. When you use the KitchenAid with a bread hook, you don't want to go up above, this has 0 to 10, so we're probably going to be at about a 3 when we actually start going here. But I'm going to start it off a little bit low here. When I have things like flour or cornstarch, I'm using a mixer. I don't want to have it on too high of a setting to begin with, especially if I'm adding like a powdered sugar or cornstarch or something, because it's going to kick up all that into the air and it's not going to end up in my final product. So I just want to kind of give it a little bit of a start here. And as far as the recipe goes, I'm just double checking to make sure I didn't forget anything. And I have not. So I'm going to grab my rubber spatula. Just gonna, if you need to, pause for a second, move that flour more towards the center. Just because it has a tendency, especially when your KitchenAid's a little bit older like mine, it has a tendency to not quite get the bottom, it has a tendency not to get the side. So it's okay if you turn it off once in a while and just kind of move things down to where it's going to get incorporated better. And since I've got no risk of fluffing anymore, I'm going to take it up to a 3. I think that the instructions on this say don't go higher than a 4. So I would have to double check that, but I know that for a bread hook you want it to stay relatively low. So it's starting to integrate here, and it's going to kind of create a ball and it's going to start mixing around. Now if you are kneading it, you want to have a lightly floured surface, and you basically want to keep going until it stops sticking to your fingers. After that, you would want to take it and put it into a bowl, and then cover it with something. So you can, I'm going to let you guys hear what I'm trying to say here. So when you guys go to cover it, you can use like a moist kitchen towel, make sure it's a clean one. That's going to kind of help stop it from getting a crusting on it, and help it rise okay. But too much moisture added to it, like if you try to cover it in water or something to kind of protect it from getting dried out, what's going to end up happening with that is that it's going to stay too moist and you're going to have trouble working with it later. You can cover it in olive oil. That will also prevent that drying out of the outer crust. And it's just going to make it, but it is going to make it a little bit harder to work with. So it's going to come down to preference for the most part. A lot of times, you know, if you get it to the point where it's not sticky anymore and you just cover it with a cloth or saran wrap or something like that, then it's probably not going to get too dried out for you. So I'm going to go ahead and let this go for a while. I want you to notice here that this is looking really kind of dry here and kind of brittle. And that means that there's going to be not enough liquid content. So I've added a little bit more olive oil to it, and I'm add a little bit more water to it. And you want to go in little baby steps, otherwise you're going to find that you can go too far with it really easily. So, but if you do, you know, just add a little bit more flour on top. Here we are with our dough now, and you can see I can touch this a lot, and it's kind of springing back into position a little bit. So that's actually pretty well worked. It's not going to be perfect, but you see it's not sticking to my hands. So I did have to add a little bit of olive oil. I had to add a little bit of water to this, and then I added too much, and so I added like probably around a half teaspoon of flour into the bowl, maybe up to a full or a tablespoon rather. Just to kind of get this so it would actually move around in there and it would actually start to knead better again. So you can see not sticky, not at all. And so I'm just going to go ahead and put some avocado oil over the top of it and then just cover this with saran wrap and come back in an hour. It should have doubled inside. You can see this has risen up and the plastic came off really easily, and it's quite a bit larger than it was before. And I've gone ahead and started to flour the surface here. You can use cornstarch as well. Cornstarch works pretty decently. Whatever works for you. So the thing about rollers, you never get these particularly wet and you don't wash them, okay? You just get all the excess flour and crap off of here. These are oiled, and so if you try to wash them, they're going to start to dry out and then stuff's going to stick to them like crazy. So we don't necessarily want to do that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here, I'm going to grab a piece like that, okay? And roll it into a little bit of ball. Get a little bit of flour on it so it doesn't stick to my roller. What you'll find is when you're rolling things, whether it's a pie dough or you're rolling bread or whatever, what's going to end up happening if you, as you roll it, it's going to expand out and there's going to become gaps in the flour that you put on there. So those are going to become sticky spots. So the more you roll something, the more likely it is going to stick. Right? So a lot of times you see how it's starting to stick to the roller. I'll flip it over, I'll move it around in the flour, and try to get that much bigger. Whoop. All right. Flip it over again. So by flipping it, what I'm doing is I'm actually getting more of a spread of flour on there. So it looks like I could have gone a little bit larger with my piece here. But there we go. I'm going to go ahead and set that there. And I'm just going to take a little bit of cornstarch or flour and I'm going to put it right there on top of it. So that when I stack these, they're not going to stick to one another. And I'm just going to let it sit there for about another hour so that it can hopefully have a chance to rise a little bit more. And that way, it's going to still be nice and fluffy. Now, when you put it into the oil in the pan for these, because these are flatbread, right? When you put it into the oil of the pan, the heat's going to activate the yeast again, and it's going to rise a little bit more, potentially quite a bit more. So it's okay if these end up a little bit on the thin side, but you do want to maintain some of that fluffiness. You don't want to lose all that gas that you put through here. So I'm just trying to get it up to the size that I want, and not necessarily to like any particular thinness, because I want this to be a little bit of fluffy. This is a naan, basically, is what we're doing here. So that's going to be this step, and then in about an hour or so, we're going to go ahead and we're going to toss these into a pan. So as this is continuing to rise, and you can see it's getting a little bit thicker. I'm not expecting it to get a whole lot thicker when it comes to the flatbread here, but it's doing all right. So for my protein tonight, I'm going to be using leftover rotisserie chicken, and for this, I'm going to want a bowl to put into. So when we're carving up the chicken, and this one obviously we've already been having at it, you want to know a little bit about the anatomy. So you've got the breastbone or sternum here, and you can usually follow this down and then lightly kind of move away from this. Now this might be easier, it might be harder because look at all that fat. Let's get that off of there. That's like jelly, gross. But yeah, when meat is cold, because this just came out of the fridge, it's going to be kind of easier to get like thin cuts out of it. So if you're trying to do something that's like razor thin cuts of meat, then it's going to be easier to do if it's cold. I haven't really tried to carve up a rotisserie like this while it's cold, so we'll see how this goes. But generally speaking, yeah, I'll do it usually when I first get it. Certain things, because it's a rotisserie that I got from Costco, it kind of just falls apart relatively easily. But the things that people tend to miss, and I'm going to get this jelly-like fat out of here, is like this back area here. You've got some really, really tender meat that tends to be throughout here. So I'm just going to go ahead and carve that out. And just be really mindful. My knife is really sharp, and so you can actually see here that I actually got a little bit of bone there. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and carve this up. And for these pizzas, if you want to call them that, you can use whatever kind of protein you like. I usually do this with chicken, but I feel like beef would be excellent with this. Maybe not pork. You could do it with fish too. Yeah, I'd use like that tilapia. Would be a very good fish to start using with this. So yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and keep carving this guy up. And a lot of times when I do this, like I'll start pulling back, and when I'm trying to separate out bones when I'm carving, I try to look for the joint, right? And see, this one's already falling apart a little bit, and actually, boom. Blooper reel. But a lot of times you can like find the joint, and you would be able to actually get your knife in there. That's one of the reasons why you want to use a narrow knife, is so that you can just get into those joints a little bit easier. Just be very mindful that you're not cutting off little pieces of bones. And a lot of times, you see, this is such a slow cooked piece of chicken here, that oftentimes I really don't even need to use the knife at all, because it's just falling apart here. So maybe around Thanksgiving I'll show you how to actually like really do a great job about carving a bird. But for right now, this is just what we're using. Now, if I were to be doing chicken, fresh chicken, so I like have it freshly thawed or freshly bought from the store, I would actually cut it into thin pieces, so I'd butterfly it down pretty small, and I would keep it as like slabs of breast or thigh meat or whatever you're using, and I would
kind of toss it in a little bit of spices, so like black pepper, a little bit of cumin goes a long way, but it's gonna, especially with Mediterranean food like this, it's gonna actually be a pretty welcomed flavor. Herbs, you can use dried or you can use fresh. If you're using fresh, what I would kind of recommend doing is actually putting the fresh herbs into the oil of the pan before you start putting anything else in. And the reason why you would do that is so that it diffuses out in the oil. Otherwise, it's just not going to necessarily impart much flavor. So you see right now I'm cutting around the joint here to separate that out. But yeah, it's not going to impart a whole lot of flavor if you are multitasking. Sorry, folks. But if you just kind of throw the herbs in there, whereas like with dried herbs, and they're kind of the small flakes, they kind of stick to the meat, and that's where you're going to get that flavor. So, you know, again, I'm going to be pretty conservative about how much salt I throw in there, especially if it is, you know, something that advertises that it's, you know, juicier than other chickens or whatever. The way that they're going to do that is they're going to brine it, which is, brining is when you soak the chicken in salt water, so it absorbs more of that salt, and that's going to help it actually retain more water. But then your sodium levels go up through the roof. So, yeah, we'll get back here in a second. One thing I did want to mention, this is my meat cutting board. You can see that it's red, that indicates it's the meat cutting board, but you don't see the tracks on this, and that's because I'm using the back side. And the reason I'm using the back side on this is because any like germs from raw meat that might still be in the board are going to be on the other side, and I want to use this side as it's going to be something that's going to be more likely to be completely sterile or sanitized than otherwise. Then I'll use like the vegetable boards for like my fruits and veggies that I'm going to do here in a minute. But the reason why I'm doing my cooked meats on this board on the back side is even though you know, they are cooked and they are technically a ready to eat food, they might still have bacteria that's not going to be present in your fresh food. And so I'm going to be you know, hopefully separating those out enough so that there's going to be less cross-contamination, which could lead to foodborne illness. So, get my pan here, and I'm going to be basically doing this as a little bit of a Dutch oven sort of deal. So, I'm going to spray in my avocado oil. Again, this pan's going to get pretty hot, and I just don't want my bread to stick on here. But if I were to use something like butter or an olive oil, it's gonna become well, it's going to burn. And it's also, if I use too much oil, and the reason why I'm spraying it in is if I use too much oil, then I'm going to end up with a lot of the flour is going to be like there on the bottom, and it's going to get all kind of funky here. That might not be hot enough yet, but we're going to go ahead and give it a shot. Throw this guy right here for a place for that to land. And if it's hot enough, you know, this is really going to take like 30 seconds to maybe, you know, maybe 45 seconds to a minute on each side for it to cook. But you really want to be mindful of it that you don't burn it, right? So I'm going to actually, for one of my toppings, I'm going to use fried garlic and shallots. So I'm going to go ahead and chop these up here. Again, this is going to be just like any other onion here. I'm going to go ahead and peel this off. And since I want to have a little bit more of that onion character, like shape and crunch and all that, again, I'm going to not really like do the slice through horizontally and the vertical slices and then dice it. I'm going to go ahead and keep these as the rings. So I'm just going to come back and peel those apart. Alright. And same deal with the second one. Now these are kind of grody looking, to be honest with you. So I might not get much out of this side. So, as you can see when I peel this back, like, it's not the prettiest thing there at all. So I'm going to go ahead and go a little bit deeper. Again, I don't want to peel off too many layers. That's not bad. Okay, so a little bit better there. All right, so. All right, so now those can get grilled up. I'm going to go ahead and check on this. Whoa! Hello. That yeast got super excited there, so we got nice and bubbly there. Alright, and from here, grab an edge. It should have enough structure that you can just use your fingers, but if you want to, you can use a spatula, you can use tongs or whatever. So it's going to have like nice bubbles and all that. So you want it, yeah. I'll show you it in a minute. So scoop these guys up in this bowl over here because these guys are going to get fried up here in a second. And now I'm going to go ahead and peel off garlic. And I don't know that I've shown you guys how to really handle garlic yet. There's a lot of tricks out there that people talk about on the internet to get the little hairs off and all that. I've never had any of them work. So the way that, or the white coating here. So the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to cut off both ends. Okay, because these are it's held on to the root part of it, right? And then it comes together and it binds up the top. So if I cut off the top and the bottom, I'm cutting off both the things that are really holding it onto that. And from there, you know, you might be able to do the shake trip where you put it into like a glass Tupperware, and then you shake it, shake it, shake it, shake it, and it all comes off. But you know, I tend to find it still sticking on there. And you'll find, especially with fresh garlic, that it's when you get down to the garlic and trying to peel this shit off, it's very sticky. It'll get all over your hands, and you get all the paper stuck to your hands. I don't have a great solution for that, so. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and cut off both ends. Now I'm going to smash them flat a little bit. And that's, again, it's going to break that surface a little bit. So that it separates from your garlic. Boom. Now I'm going to check my bread. So this one should be pretty much done now, right? So you see it's got that like nice, fluffy, it's not super bready, right? Because we're doing more kind of a pizza sort of thing, but... And you could use this, you know, as a pizza crust if you wanted to. I haven't tried it, but I'm pretty sure it'd work. Alright, so this one's actually thicker than the last one. Woo! Okay. And then Dutch oven that. Alright, so now that I've smashed this, these should start to peel off pretty easily. And hopefully with the flour that's not up now on my hands, they're not going to stick to my hands too much. Of course, I'm getting backwards here. So when it comes to the garlic, once I get all the hairs off, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to slice it into similar discs like I did the shallots, because you know I want to have a little bit more of that character there. This one's got a little bit of a brown spot on it, so I'm just going to cut that off and discard it. Whoop. That one does too. Those ones do not have hairs on them, so or the white covering on. So boom, boom, boom. So that pan is starting to get quite a bit hotter, so I need to actually watch it a little bit closer here in a second, just because I don't want that to burn and it's going to cook a little bit hotter. So actually I probably can turn that down now. Notice how in one of my last video, guys, I totally said I was turning down the stove and I intended on it and I turned it up, because I'm an idiot sometimes. Alright, oh, that's really bready. Ooh, nice, nice. Okay, so Again, when I'm cutting these guys, in case you haven't watched my other videos, knuckle to the front, finger pulled back, thumb on the back to push forward. But make sure that your thumb doesn't tuck under into the danger zone, right? So. So, I'm not being particularly anal about this garlic here, right? Some of it's kind of into little blocks, some of it's into the discs that I wanted. But I don't care that much. I'm going to get the same amount of flavor out of it, and it's going to be pungent as hell. So, this guy, nice and fluffy. I'm kind of concerned these might be a little bit doughy on the inside. Nope, nope, it's good. This is a stupid thing. I don't like it. You could just pour the olive oil or avocado oil straight in here, but I still kind of like that I'm not using as much and not making things taste like deep fried and crap. Wow, these are just getting thicker as they go further down. This one did not have enough flour on it. Okay, here we are. Boom. Oh. Let's maintain some of that fluffiness. Oh my gosh. Alright, so when it comes to my olives here, I'm just going to pull a bunch out here,
And how small you want them is going to be up to you. But again, I'm going to show you the same technique that I've probably shown you a couple times now. And I've just honed this knife so it should work really well here. So I'm going to put my palm down. And if anything, if your knife is going to migrate, I want it to migrate down into the cutting board, right? So I'm going to be very careful here. Some moderate pressure. If there's a pit in here, I'll know. Okay, I can feel I'm getting closer to my hand, so I'm going to be very slow and mindful here. Cut through, and now you see they're cut nice and neatly in half here, right? Well, that's probably good for this. I should probably have another bowl. So, for the amount that we need tonight, maybe I'll do a couple more than that. This is all flavor here. Oh, I should have asked Jeff to bring home basil. So we're just going to put on like some arugula and some spinach and other kind of, high nutrient greens into this. But basil is definitely something that's going to give this like some really good character here. So with these tomatoes, right? They're already kind of flat. They're already small and whatnot. So you could just use them as is, but I want to make sure everything's bite-sized here, right? I don't want things sliding around. So I'm going to kind of do these a little bit more like julienne cuts. So nice narrow strips. I'm just going to go ahead and keep these in a little ball, right? Not too concerned about whether or not they're, perfectly all the same side. I just want them to be a little bit more bite-sized. And these ones are stored in oil. Sometimes you can get these dry enough, sometimes a little bit better here. You could also just use fresh tomatoes if you want. Okay, this is totally your food, so. But I tend to like the sweetness of the sun-dried. So just like with the yakisoba, I went ahead and I put this down to a medium heat, and I'm going to go ahead and pour in some oil. And I appear to be pretty much out of my avocado oil, so I'm going to use the vegetable oil that my roommate left. Again, I don't tend to like to use vegetable oils because they're gross and not necessarily that healthy. Once I start seeing that viscosity is starting to change and we're kind of getting up to temperature, I'm going to go ahead and drop those in. So as far as like my other toppings, I'm going to be using a blue cheese today for part of it. You probably might be happier with the feta. This is my first time trying it with the blue cheese, so we'll see what happens. I'm also going to be using hummus. We're there. So in case you haven't seen before, you can see that is now kind of watery, right? So I'm going to go ahead and dump these in. It might have been a little bit cool, but because we should have some reaction from the oil once the onions and garlic have dropped in there. And I'll just take this opportunity to kind of separate out these rings because they're not going to cook quite right if I keep them there. Now sometimes I cheat with this. So when I'm cutting the rings and cutting them into the rings, I will cut down the middle of just one cut down the middle of the onions so that they're not actually a ring, they're just like half circles. And by doing that, what I'm doing is I'm making it so that they just easily fall apart there. So, that's going back out. So, that one's a little bit on the thin side, kind of crackery. It's partially because, these guys are fucking sticking. Ways that you could potentially avoid that is put parchment between them, right? Or you can roll them out right before you go to the pan, but again, you're not going to get the thicker, fluffier ones that we've gotten here so far. So maybe on the next time I do this, I might use 2 plates of these, or 3, so that they're not stacked up on each other so tightly. There we go. So when it comes to the chicken, I could microwave that, or I can basically throw it into a pan to reheat it. And if I do that, then I have an opportunity to start throwing in some herbs and other things that might be really complementary to this, as well as my cumin. So I think I'm going to actually do that tonight. So I'm going to get out my smoked paprika. I'm going to get out some Italian dried herbs. It's just kind of a mix here. Again, I've already got garlic and shallots going on in there, so I don't need to worry about that too much. So the next one is going to be my cumin. All right. Now, cumin is one of those things, guys. It's the flavor that and the aromatic that I associate with chili, right? So it's kind of that
one thing that I'm like, right, that's really where that comes from. But I find that it actually works pretty well with this. Just be very conservative about how much you put in there because, again, cumin's one of those things that can really, really dominate whatever you're cooking. Reheating my chicken here. I didn't really cut these very small. But you can see viscosity is definitely there. It's definitely very watery, it's actually starting to smoke. I actually just put that oil in, but since the pan was already hot from me doing stuff, turn that down a bit. Woohoo! So I'm just going to be throwing my chicken in there, get a nice little layer going. So, I mean, the chicken already had like a nice juicy flavor, but they didn't use a whole lot in the way of like little flavor elements. So I'm going to toss in my dried herbs. It's just a Italian seasoning blend. It's not really seasoning, it's really just herbs, but you know, whatever, taco. A little bit of paprika there. And then again, I'm going to be a little bit conservative when it comes to this cumin. Assuming it comes out at all. So, and one of the reasons why I'm doing this way instead of using like a microwave or an oven to kind of reheat this is that I'm actually going to be retaining more moisture this way. If you use a microwave, it's going to kind of reheat it unevenly. I wouldn't recommend doing this for everything, but for this it's actually pretty nice. So you can see there, nice browning here on our garlic and onions. So it's a little bit caramelized, but not over the top. So let's start building this thing. Okay, that should be home any minute now, so we can go ahead and start plating up. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take a piece of flatbread. I'm going to put on a layer of hummus. I actually had a Greek person correct me on this when I was calling it hummus. Apparently that's not the pronunciation, it's actually hummus. But you know, whatever. Alright, so just getting a nice little layer there. Now, I know that, you know, you're probably sitting there going, well, Chris, why didn't you show us how to make hummus from scratch? And the answer to that is I tried that once, and it sucked. So, I'm just going to be using store-bought hummus today. Alright, so I've got a nice little layer there, and then I can just throw on whatever as I'm going along. So I'm going to check on this, make sure that that's not scorching here or overcooking, right? It's already cooked once, so I don't have to really worry too much about getting this like really well done at this point, right? Just leftovers. And next I'm going to start throwing on my stuff. So there's my sun-dried tomatoes, my Kalamala olives, and just get a nice little covering there. We'll throw on a little bit of my blue cheese, and again, if you want to use feta to be a little bit more authentic, you can go ahead and do that. Again, this is also something that would be like really, really well complemented with like basil if you have fresh basil, but I forgot to ask for it. So here we go. Now I've got my water running, so I'm going to rinse off my arugula here. It's going to be lovely. And I know that these boxes always say, you know, wash and ready to eat, but you know, especially during COVID, I just don't want to chance it too much, so I go ahead and give that a nice little rinse down. We've got a nice little covering of arugula on there. Now, scoop some of this out. Spread it around nice and evenly. That is looking delicious. Alright. And then some of our garlic and onion mixture here. Around. And that's pretty much it, guys. Super simple to make. It does take a little bit of extra time because, of course, we're making the bread from scratch. You could use a naan or flatbread that you can get at the grocery store, but I think it's going to be harder for you to find a good quality one. They always kind of have a stale taste to me because of the way that you have to make naan. The other way that you can do the naan instead of using it in the pan is you can totally use like a brick pizza oven if you have one. You could bake it in the regular oven if you wanted to, but again, you're not going to get that kind of crispiness that you kind of expect with a naan. So, there we have it, guys. That's dinner tonight. Enjoy and let me know what you think. Alright.